I believe, I'm not sure who quoted it, but they were talking about how Zeus was sitting around with the Council of Gods, and they were figuring out a way to maintain their hegemony over the human race. And so they said, well, let us cleft them in two, and that way they'll be forever searching for their missing halves. And it just sort of, for me, was the quote of this, the beginning of the battle of the genders, and all these different things. And so when you get into the myths, and then you look at the race memory, and you look at the evidences of today, and as you said, you get into these malignant female characters throughout history. You even get into the birth of having women considered citizens and people. Back in when, but this was of course financed and set up by, I believe it was the Rockefeller coterie, when they were trying to liberate women's liberation. There was funding, and there was organized funding and structure behind that. So a lot of women today think that their liberation came out of something that was good. Oh yeah, we finally became recognized, but then we know that this was done specifically so that women could be taxed equally, and they could generate more control ultimately over both men and women. So there's all kinds of things to get into that, but I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about how important it is, this phylogenetic or cellular race memory, and how we are underestimating how that still affects our consciousness today.
Well, see, look how it affects us. If what I'm saying is true, right? For instance, that there was this dark sisterhood who, were their symbolism is on the front, but they themselves conceal themselves behind the masculine societies. Let's say it's the secret societies that we're familiar with, right? But then we start to get on the trail through looking at the symbolism on money and on coins and in the city squares and what have you. Right up to things that we're in the age of Kali. Even some Vedic scholars believe our whole age is under a sort of a dark goddess. I mean, what more could you want than that? And as I say, the instances all over the world, from the Etruscans to the Celts to the ancient Greeks and certainly the Egyptians, the exaltation of the female, that the pharaoh had to become pharaoh by marrying the great royal wife, the approved female being. That every single structure, that means every temple, anything sacred that ever stood, from an obelisk to a temple, couldn't even be inaugurated. You hear about masons laying the stone, and you hear about other palava today. Yeah, but in ancient days, the stone was actually laid and sanctified by a female, by the priestess who represented the goddess. The symbol of the orb and the wings and the two serpents over the doors of every sacred place in the ancient world, from Sumeria to the Phoenicians, to the Canaanites, to the Minoans, Cretans, Philistines, and Egyptians, most famous of all, and even the Celts. That's a female symbol. So when you walk into the portal itself is dedicated to the goddess Nephthys. The whole damn temple is an image. Even the Jews concede this in their Temple of Solomon. Yeah, that's the temple, but inside is a Holy of Holies, which every person who studied Judaism knows is a Shekinah. It's the female symbol, period. And then there's how the Shekinah motif turns up in the deep Kabbalah. When you're really studying the Kabbalah, you find out that the whole Kabbalah is a tree of life, ergo the female. But that tree of life then turns up in the Bible. You see, so you have to dive in. You have to become like this mercurial person who's able to study all of these things, have everything on the desk, get your arms around all of this information. But to answer your question is this, is that it is not just men in this planet who've got to deal with their guilt and their need to evolve. It's not only men who've got to realize that when they charged off down this lunatic road, like Patrick McGowan and so many pointed out in his Prisoner series, of technology and progress for the sake of it. And maybe they need to put the brakes on that and change again, and maybe ask questions about, was that the right road to go on? That we've now turned the world into a nightmare? So men have the questions to ask about their personality and their psyche and their characterological traits, right from the domestic to the corporate. But what, women are just going to go shopping and forget about it? Women have to take a deep look at who they are as well and ask themselves a question. Are they happy with who they've become? Are they happy the way the world is? Well, women trudged into the munitions factories to build the bombs and the bullets in both First and Second World War, and are still doing it, to destroy women and children. You think Dresden was only bombed by men? You see? So we've got, let's hold a mirror up to both sides and ask from the domestic to the corporate level, are women happy with the freedom that they got? Don't you know that the Illuminati periodically hand you a carrot in order to keep you from exploding? I don't know a woman today who knows that. They think that their newfound freedom and their so-called, modicum of a sexual and social freedom that they got. You know, they're crying out, thinking this great thing. It was an award. It was a privilege, just like the driving license is a privilege, pal. They can take it away as fast as they can give it to you. Yeah. Or they might give it to you for duplicitous reasons so that now you go buck mad. They know that a person like a third world country that's been held under a third world status for years, the moment that you give it a few refrigerators and some Coca-Cola, just watch them go berserk. Well, it's the same on every level. Give a modicum of freedom to somebody who's been held down for centuries and watch them go apeshit as what's happening. This is how things happen. Does that mean it's good? Does it mean that you're helping society, helping the world, helping civilization? Of course not. What you've become is a malignant version of femininity. You become a malignant version of masculinity. Today, the words masculine and feminine, just like the word virgin and many other words I deal with, these talismanic terms, is probably the most abused terms. How can you know what masculinity is when its mirror is malignant? How can you know what true femininity is when its mirror is malignant? So we have had homework to do. Both male and females today have to step out of the objective, from a studious point of view, step out objectively from the roles that they've inherited and start asking bigger questions about who they are on the canvas of greater life. Because all of our civilizations are crumbling. And man is responsible for that, and so is women. And both genders have to look into their psyche to find out what are the hidden aspects, what are they contributing to, what are they responsible for, what are they guilty of, and what should they be proud of. And in this work, which you could call psychological or whatever, I just call it spirit work. It's the work of spirit, to find out who and what you are on an existential level, and then after you find that out, move out, to the world. But this homework has to be done, because it'll be imbalanced if only one small group do it. If a person goes through their whole life, David, assuming that what they know of their own manhood is kosher, okay, cool, and the woman goes through her own, never questioning what some of them what is it to be really female? Is that a custodian of something? Is there a higher duty that needs to be performed? For thousands of years, women held a grail of spirituality for the whole planet. May have invented some of the architecture of what we call civilization. Not that most men have ever wrote about it or accepted it, but it's a fact. And should our civilization start to melt down, who's going to be there to succor? Who's going to be there to give, mankind, so to speak, any kind of hope to build anew? Man had the physical strength, he had the tenacity, and he had the muscular strength, but women have strength. In the village, they constituted an incredible strength of emotional strength and psychological strength, which is absolutely required for the other masculine strength to have its, to focus on those strengths. One strength can't exist without the other.
Well, and as you said earlier, any man born was nurtured by a mother. You need that nurturing, motherly aspect. So that's the positive side. And of course, on the darker element, that can be manipulated to sucker people in, because everybody requires that motherly, nurturing figure. They require that love and that warmth and that connection. And so that can also be manipulated. So that's why I think what people also need to take into consideration.
Look at Jesus. Many times, the greatest, most poignant stories is in the presence of Mary, one or the other. The mother of the Mary, the famous birth of Jesus is in the presence of his mother. The famous pieta of his death, coming down from the cross, he falls into the hands of his mother. At his resurrection, 3 women turned up to bathe and take the body at his resurrection, not the men, right? So in the life of every hero, you don't see Horace half the time when he's not sitting on the lap of his mother. So that's the same thing, with the Holy Spirit. If you really dig into the etymology of that, you'll find it too is feminine. In fact, there's a concept called viraj in the Vedic, the power of all powers. Even Kundalini translates ultimately, the Ida and Pangalas. These all translate into feminine terms. Sophia in the Gnostic traditions and what have you, right? Incredible stuff there. And it doesn't matter if it's Mithras or Zoroaster or whatever, kind of heroic character you can think about. There's a moment of repose, a moment of marriage, a moment of chemical wedding in which either they're in being armed. These various Perseus and various other heroes are actually given the weapons and the winged feet by the females. You see this picked up in modern movies like Red Sonja, and in Frank Herbert's wonderful Dune series, the Bene Gesserits being more of a ghastly evil, cult. But you also have power women there who are instrumental in leading the hero, holding a light for him. This is recurrent. You have the dark woman or the Lady of the Lakes, versus the Morganly phase, the malignant, as I said, the malignant version of femininity. I didn't invent it; it's right there. You know, you have the upward pointed pentagram, you have the negative one. You have these cults that have inspired men to the greatest achievements, both artistically and intellectually. And you have also the dark women who takes the good man and destroys him, either through confusion or sexual, debauchery or some other kind of mythic level betrayals and all of this kind of thing. It's absolutely, what would you call it? It's like wall to wall. It's ubiquitous throughout our entire culture. And so that power that is invested in the female can go one way or the other, can't it? Infanticide. You know, you're not just going to blame men of infidelity, incest, hypocrisy, duplicity, manipulation, deception, right? Luring, incarceration, bewitching, murder, infanticide, patricide, regicide. Aren't women as guilty of these things, as I said, when they sat on the thrones of power, or even when they have it domestically? So anyone who can also contribute to the destruction of civilization, can also be the star women and the sun women. And you do see that. You do see a strivance to that, where in the New Age movement, that has been the good part of it, is that women have looked to their power, looked to their sovereignty, not want to follow those banal roles that have been handed down to them by malignant masculinity. And some of the women, unfortunately, react to it in a much more violent, and that's an emotional manner, which I don't think is good. They should just see it for what it is and go through their process. But then you get the other side of the female woman, the female in the New Age movement, where it's not, I don't want to look at anything dark. I've so confronted my demons now, and I've looked at all this evil shit that men have done. Don't disturb me while I'm in this little fuzzy bubble. Well, who told you to do that? You call that evolution? You see, so and men also are guilty of the same thing. There can be this Apollonian distancing and editing of reality, again creeping in, which unfortunately in the New Age movement it has now, where the women have no guts, and they're not looking at themselves, and they're not looking at the world anymore in a rational way. Some are, but those women are often marginalized. What we have now is again another sort of a battle between women who just refuse to see the realities, and these other women who are in the New Age movement or in the conspiracy movement, loving it, reading it, studying, but they're not being marginalized themselves. I get a lot of emails from women that this is happening to them, where they're being literally marginalized by the family and even by these other groups that they are part of, because anytime they bring up anything conspiratorial or to do with the hidden hand of control or whatever, they're immediately silenced and vetoed and rejected by a lot of the other New Age groups to which they affiliate. So there's dangers all the way down the line.
That's such a good point, and I was actually, one of the questions I wanted to talk about was this idea of masculinity and femininity, not just in a physical sense, but also just in terms of thinking in consciousness, right? And if you have an imbalance on either side, you're going to start seeing the more malignant form of that expressed. So if you look at something like the New Age movement, which of course there's a lot of well-intentioned people, there are good things that have come out of that, but there's also a high level of manipulation going on for people to just go back to sleep. And they're using a very, very right-brained but extreme imbalanced right-brain approach, where it's just, your head is just up in the clouds and that's it. There is no solid foundation on the ground balancing it out with the masculine side. So this doesn't always pertain to just physical men and physical women, does it?
No, of course it's not. It's all about orientation, because a man can have a feminine side and a woman can have a masculine side. And anyone also, the danger in a lot of these subjects that we're dealing with is that people on both sides, male and female, just simply get into it as an intellectual pursuit, something to do. I'm bored with life, so now I'm going to read a few books on conspiracy. And so it becomes an intellectual process rather than a spiritual process in which that information is leading you to do inner homework. Now, when people come to my work, they're not going to get very far with that, because I'm always reminding them that anything we're dealing here with, any papers we're pushing, any books that are being written, any interviews we're doing, or any programs that are being made, regardless of the interest of the subject matter, it all comes under the heading that you must take this personally. Not only must you take it personally to go on and make further studies than I've ever been able to do, but you also must start to examine, yourself in the context of that. So this is just background. You fill in the background, and then you hope that people will start to say, yeah, when I understand, what you're talking about, Michael, maybe I'm not that interested to become a fucking slave, to Christian church or to the Islamic church or to Judaism or whatever. And that's a big step for these people. And they're gonna again alienate themselves. But it's very good, because they may be alienating themselves from people, but they're relinking themselves to selfhood. And they're relinking themselves to something that is far higher. They're getting in touch with their higher guides. And they may even be contributing down the line to subjects of this kind, teaching their children and not allowing themselves to be surrounded by idiots. So that when they go and do make friends, they're a bit more cautious about the friends that they're picking. When they do go and get married, they don't marry a nitwit, a numbskull, who's not going to back them up and show interest in these same subjects. All of these things on the smaller scale are essential, because then they lead to bigger things. Smaller things lead to bigger things. I find this stuff to be interesting because I'm very, very, I know the empowerment that comes with it. It's a simple matter of that knowledge empowers you, and you have the revelations. So that may put you on the white squares of knowledge, and then nobody can move you from that. Or you remain in ignorance and let other nitwits and nincompoops get on the white squares and push you around. We have the power. They do not have the power, but they have the control, and they control knowledge. They control its distribution of knowledge. They have the control of edifying you from morning to night with a bunch of just sports and sensations and things that of themselves are okay. But then when you deluged it. So just look at the average mind today. Look at the average child today. Look at the average, what's going on in the world of women. Just look at what's happening in the world of men today. And you'll start to see that this is extremely serious. This is not just ancient history or what have you. There's something deeper going on. And my work is going there whether people are into it or not, because to me, way back in Ireland, one of the first things you encounter when you're studying Celts and pre-Celts is the goddess tradition. Some of the most ancient races of my country, even their name referred to a goddess, and every part of their rites and rituals. But these are, on the surface, warrior classes. But the women were right there, sword in hand, defending against the enemy. They were the highest caste of priestesses. Right? Even when kings sat, they often sat in a manner that represented the female. The throne upon which they sat was on a mound or a hill. Sometimes, like in the case of a place called Derry, 3 kings sat. Well, we know that the 3 spirals is the patent symbol of Ireland, but that idea comes again from the triple goddess. I've gone into this in my Path of the Fool series a little bit, and then it goes on. It goes on where they understood that the whole earth, let alone the sky, was personified in a female goddess, or in some cases androgynous. That the waxing of the moon may have been masculine, but the waning of the moon is feminine. So everything was in a state of balance. Now we, in the modern age, have deeply lost this sense of balance in every which way you can imagine. And that's because we have malignant parents who had malignant parents before them, and so on. So this work, no matter how interesting the subject matter is, it's based on you realigning yourself and reattuning yourself, both with yourself, with the earth and the sky. This is the holy work. It's simply not an intellectual exercise, which a lot of people today in the New Age movement and in the conspiratorial community are thinking that it is. It's the accumulation of facts, and then the regurgitation of those facts. It's partly that, but it's so much more spiritual. It's about trying to find a wholeness that our ancient forebears experienced and had, but the methodology of teaching that to the moderns, you see, has been occluded and lost, but can easily be found back by reverent people who go back to see how these forebears, what they were doing.
It's so interesting that you say that, Michael, in regards to this work and this information, is that I see the same struggle taking place within the martial art community, of course, which I'm a part of, and I try to bring back the lost philosophy and wisdom from the original warrior traditions, and how there is nothing but a focus on, like, as in this research field, they're focusing on only the intellectual aspect of it and just acquiring facts. In the martial art community, they're focusing purely on the physical dominance factor and just what's the best technique to win, how do you choke somebody out the best way, how do you get a knockout in a fight or whatever. And those are the focus points, whereas I've always taught it from the original tradition, which is that this is really just metaphoric. It's a spiritual process, really. All of these obstacles and opponents that you might come upon in your training are just there to challenge your spirit and your mind and your being, and to grow and to keep moving upwards. So there shouldn't be a focus on just what kind of physical attributes you can gain that is just a process of which you are expressing your spirit and learning about who you are, why you're here, and where you're going. So I just wanted to echo that from this, and you can see this everywhere. You can see this in all kinds of expressions of art and culture, where there's a movement towards focusing purely on the aesthetic, purely on the exoteric, if you will, and losing that deeper aspect and the deeper knowledge and wisdom that's actually being thought about and portrayed there.